Thank you very much, Ken. And so we're now going to hear from Mark Taliano. Mark is a retired high school teacher from Grimsby and a regular contributor to globalresearch.ca. It's a site that I think many people know about. It's a wonderful source of information. And Mark joined the third tour of peace to Syria just in September. And he visited, I'll get the pronunciation wrong, I'm sure, but Mark will have it right.
No, I won't.
Malula,
yeah.
And returned with lots of photos, videos, and insights into the human tragedy that has unfolded in the past 5 years in that country, many of which he'll share with you. And his new ebook, Syria's War for Humanity, Mark argues that if Syria and its allies win this war, humanity will win, and if Syria loses, we will all lose. So, Mark, you have the floor. Thank you.
Let me pass those around. No, I have a lot of pictures from Syria so that we can just pass them around. Okay. As I talk, I won't be offended. Yeah, except for Ken, I'm hesitant to speak about Syria because I'm hesitant to offend people, and I find it's really easy to offend people when I speak of Syria because I prefer to tell the truth. And I have a neighbor who lives not far from me, and we're not really speaking right now because I told him what I know based upon empirical evidence to be the case and from my visit, and that contradicts everything that he believes about Syria. And that's not a reflection on his intelligence at all. It's a reflection of the media bias against Syria. And I think, and Tim Anderson would argue as well, that it is unprecedented. And so what I have on global research right now is an iBook, which is like a first draft. And then I've been given the green light to have an ebook. So that's where I'm headed. Now this first book is Syria's War for Humanity because, well, as Ken has studied, I've studied this for many years, and I've seen since 9/11 the empire destroy one country after another, and that's what they're doing. They're destroying countries. Libya was destroyed. They also had free health care. They also had free education. They also supposedly had very little, they owned their homes, a lot of them. Very little homelessness, but Gaddafi was totally and unreasonably demonized, and the right to protect, responsibility to protect loophole was given to destroy that country. And it was, so I saw that, and I recall the sanctions on Iraq, which is now basically destroyed. Before, it was a secular country. But the sanctions against Iraq killed more than 500,000 kids. Newest estimates say almost 600,000. And sanctions are terrorism. And my opinion is that our governments are terrorists. Our governments are terrorist governments. I can't even watch mainstream media anymore because of what I've learned and because of what I saw. And as Ken mentioned, we also have Canada that is supposed to be progressive, but in foreign affairs, its foreign policy is barbaric. We also have illegal sanctions. And as Ken mentioned, this is, it's affecting the people tremendously. The Syrians, who are totally innocent, the Syrian civilians, the men, women, children, who had nothing to do with this, they are targeted. And the reason that imperialist countries, including Canada, does that is that they hope that the population will rise up and reject its leadership. I'm happy that that is not happening. and I respect Syrians for not letting that happen. And I think Syria is going to win this because, like Ken said, they have strong institutions, they have a secular government, and they have strong friends. And I think that if Syria wins, we all win. Because if Syria doesn't win, we are going to have in Syria a situation similar to Libya. We're going to have total chaos, and we are going to have they are going to have sectarian rule, which could include Sharia law, which is basically Wahhabism, the same type of rule that we have in Saudi Arabia, for example. So I will go through some of these slides, but I'm definitely only going to go for half an hour here. This iBook is Syria's War for Humanity. The e-book will be Voices from Syria, because those are missing from the MSM, the mainstream media lies, and some of the lies are lies of omission. And I have made contact with a lot of Syrian people because I was there during the war, and I also have other contacts. And well, when I was there in September, for example, the Americans slaughtered about I think 80 Syrian soldiers. And this was not a mistake. They don't make mistakes like that. Libya was not a mistake. Iraq was not a mistake. Syria was not a mistake. They did not make a mistake. Those Syrian troops were there for a long time, and they were on the radar screen for a long time. And as soon as they were wiped out, and they were strafed, I believe, for almost an hour, then ISIS moved in and took the position. So when the coalition was illegally bombing Syria, ISIS territory expanded. The coalition didn't touch Raqqa, which was ISIS stronghold. The coalition supports ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front. They are the foot soldiers of our governments. And a lot of people have a hard time with that, and I rarely say that because I know that our newspapers are not telling us that. But I have evidence, and Ken has evidence, that proves that beyond any reasonable doubt. It's solid evidence based upon admissions from Western sources, Western open sources. The United States politicians will sometimes try to distance themselves, but they make the admissions anyways. They still make the admissions that Saudi finances they try to say, well, you know, we're not part of it, but they are. Those are our allies. Saudi finances the mercenary terrorists. So does the Persian Gulf monarchies. They finance this. So most people take extreme offense to the notion that we support ISIS. But we do. And Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front. So if you don't mind, I would like just to give a balanced idea of what's happening and what has been happening. I would like to read what Lily Martin sent me. She is a permanent resident in Syria, and she wrote to me, she's written to me about a number of things, but including about what some of these so-called moderates do. And they aren't moderates, by the way. There are not moderates. They all work together. The moderates, the so-called moderates, it's part of a PSYOP. Number one, I think it's used to confuse people. Because if you follow the State Department, Kirby, I think it is, and you listen to him speak, it's confusing. And I think that's by design. But also, if there are moderates, then the NATO and its allies can deliver weapons to the moderates who deliver them to ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so forth, and this is documented. It's well documented. This is what they do. As Ken noted, the government, Bashar al-Assad's government, is secular. there's a firewall between that government and religion, and that's good. It's a secular, socialist type country. But imperialists don't like that, because imperialists such as Canada want to balkanize and destroy countries so that they can control the country. So imperialists are introducing into that country these mercenary terrorists who are extremists. They are not Islamic, they are un-Islamic. Islam does not preach what they do. It's un-Islamic. It's an un-Islamic ideology. Broadly speaking, we can call it Wahhabism, and its roots are in Saudi Arabia, our close friends. Saudi Arabia, Canada has a very large, expansive military hardware contract with Saudi Arabia, who are the main financiers of ISIS, Al-Qaeda. So some of this is a bit disgusting. You may want to plug your ears at some time, but I think it's important that we get an idea of what some of these terrorists do. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. But if you leave the room, I won't be offended. I'm just going to read parts of what Lily sent me. And it deals with what we call moderates, which, as I just said, aren't moderates. The FSA terrorists came into Baluta for the purpose of sectarian cleansing. The people of Baluta are Muslims of the Alawi sect. The FSA are extensively Sunni Muslim, except they aren't, like I said. What they practice and what they preach is a strange ideology. It's degenerate and barbaric. Like Ken said, most of the soldiers, if you were to ask them, what religious faith do you follow? Well, first of all, they would say, I'm Syrian first. That's what they would say. I'm Syrian. And then they might say, I'm Sunni. But they don't share the same degenerate ideology that ISIS has, and Al-Qaeda, and all the so-called moderates. They believe all other Muslims and Muslims are infidels and should be killed. They further believe, writes Lily, that all Sunni Muslims who do not follow the radical Islamic political ideology should also die. Okay, so I'm going to skip over that, bearing in mind that's the foundation of what she's saying. This is what they did when they came to this town. Okay? And, okay, so the FSA went house to house killing everyone in their path. Whole families were wiped out. These are unarmed people. One pregnant woman was seized and her stomach cut open and the fetus hung in a tree. There were many survivors, despite the fact that 220 dead bodies were later counted at the hospital in Latakia. The survivors made their way to an empty school in Latakia and took shelter there until the village could be freed by the Syrian Arab Army on August 17, 2013. During the sectarian massacre, 100 small children and a few females were kidnapped by the FSA. They were taken as captives to Salma, which was and still is occupied and held by the FSA. The children and females were tortured. They were all held underground without sunlight. One boy had his eyes gouged out, another boy was shot through the head. About 2 weeks later, the FSA used those children to create a video. They drugged 100 children and arranged them in poses on the floor to appear dead. They created many videos using their captives as actors. This is a common theme in this war. Staged presentations to create conflict and to avoid peace. The video was sent via cell phone to contact a person in Damascus. It was that person who later uploaded the famous sarin chemical attack video on YouTube. So if you recall the sarin chemical attack, which was designed to trigger a further invasion by the U.S., that was a false flag. And it wasn't the only one. When the sarin gas video was shown constantly around the globe, the families of Baluta thought they recognized their kidnapped children's faces in the video. They contacted Mother Agnes Miriam of Syria, who is a humanitarian working towards peace and reconciliation in the Syrian crisis. So that gives you an idea of what's really happening there and what has been happening there. When I was there, like I said, 60 some odd Syrian soldiers were slaughtered by American warplanes. 100 casualties. When I was there in old Damascus, terrorists fired these explosive bullets somewhere, and there was in response, the Syrian military fired off artillery, and you heard this long, prolonged, thunderous sound. And even though I was there for a week, I had a sense there of what Syrians must feel, and I felt violated. I felt this, I didn't feel safe, and it was a violation. It made me afraid and angry. If terrorists were firing explosive bullets haphazardly in Hamilton, we would expect a response. And Syrian citizens also expect a response. And they expect protection from their government. And their government is giving them protection. And every Syrian that I talk to favors its government, appreciates the protection, and would not ever want to be ruled by the terrorists who are invading their country. I talk to people in restaurants and so on and so forth. And and that's understandable. I mean, if we just think, if this happened here, if let's say in the States they have these protests. Let's say a foreign country armed the protesters and brought in special forces. And let's say the special forces started shooting police. This is similar to what happened in Syria. I was told by someone in Syria, and now I have corroborating evidence to back this up, that the Syrian government must have known that this was going to happen. After all, we know, and we've known for a long time that this was planned in advance. And the Syrian government instructed its soldiers. It said, well, it's two lines here, people who have families and people who don't, and I want the single people to come up. Okay, we're going down to this problem at Dara, to this uprising, but you're not going to be able to carry weapons. All you have is clubs, your batons, okay? They were not armed. We are led to believe that this dirty war was started because President Assad was slaughtering his own people. Those soldiers and those police were not armed. And they were being picked off like birds. And I have this from 3 separate sources. So it was an engineered terrorism attack, false flag attack, which triggered this. And that is consistent with what we know now, that it was planned well in advance. Okay, so I'm not going to be too long, but I'm going to go through some of these, if you don't mind. So we'll go over here. I think one of the most important things we can do once we understand what's happening, and there's plenty of solid Western open source evidence telling us what exactly is happening. It's no longer reasonable to believe the mainstream media stories. That's not reasonable anymore based on what we know. So, what should we be doing about it? The United States Peace Council did an excellent job. They went down there and they recommended these steps, and these steps are immediately attainable. This war would have stopped after about maybe 1 week if this had happened. If the terrorists were not armed and supported and paid, and they get paid a whole lot more than the Syrian soldiers, this could have ended before it started. But that wasn't the intent of the imperialists. So, stop bombing Syrian economic infrastructure in the name of fighting ISIS. Stop bombing hospitals. I'm sorry, but the West bombs hospitals. Don't do it anymore. Stop bombing streets and roads and hospitals and schools. That's what they're doing. That's what they were doing. That's why ISIS territory expanded when the states were in there. Don't do it. But that's war. That's what they do in war. They want to weaken the population. They want to make the population cry out for a new leader. Our leader can't protect us. We want someone who can protect us. So they bombed, the imperialists bombed people. Stop injecting foreign fighters into Syria. I just read from a Syrian again that there's maybe, well, the figure, okay, there are Chinese mercenaries now coming in. I heard 50,000, okay? These are from, the West wants to destabilize not only Syria, but they're looking ahead to Iran and China and Russia, and it's very insane. It is very insane, because now so-called mini nukes are being put into the conventional warfare toolbox. So it's much more likely that a mini nuke could be used. This whole project for a new American century, this whole new Middle East, it's an insane, extraordinarily criminal undertaking, which is why I hope Syria wins. Because we need a multipolar world. This unipolar world is dangerous and impoverishing. Stop funding, organizing, and arming the combatants. Don't give them guns. Don't give them money. They can't fight without that. But that's happening. I have documented proof that the states, and it's on one of these slides, I'll show you, that there's a whole packing list of the weapons that they have given them. And through moderates also. Lift all sanctions on Syria. The sanctions make medicines for cancer prohibitively expensive. Kids are dying because of that. They can't afford the medications. Our country is doing this. Stop doing that. An MRI machine in Syria, they can't get parts for it because of the sanctions. They also want to weaken the economy. In Aleppo, they stole the factory machinery and shipped it off to Turkey. Anything and everything to demoralize and defeat the people. It's not happening in Syria. The Syrians are very strong. Provide humanitarian aid to the Syrian people. You remember that one convoy coming in that was attacked? What is happening sometimes is the terrorists are carting weapons, they're bringing weapons in through humanitarian convoys. The terrorists, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they attacked that they did. It wasn't an air attack. An air attack would have left craters. The Syrians attacked the convoy, or sorry, the terrorists did. Help the Syrian refugees settle wherever they want to, including back to Syria. And I hope they go back to Syria because Syria needs them. And I can say also from talking to these people, to Syrians, Syrian treats refugees very, very well. Palestinian refugees, and they have a lot of refugees. Palestinian refugees in Syria are treated, and I was talking to a Palestinian there, they are treated as well as Syrians are. But if they go to Lebanon, that's not the case. Syria treats people really well. So, if we take nothing from this, those would be the main things, if we can write the newspapers and so on. Those are important steps. Okay, next. Thanks, well, you can skip that. Thanks to Ken, he gave me the inspiration to go there. We've dealt with this. These are the people, these generals and so on, the defense intelligence agencies, the document leaks, all Western sources, which show without a doubt what's really happening, and it's the opposite to what the papers are saying. It shows that they support the opposition, and the opposition are Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, Takfiri, Salafists. Okay, we'll go next. That's Flynn, head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at the time. This document here is the DIA document which revealed the details of the plans. The wars take a long time to plan, and this detailed what the imperialists were aiming to do. I mean, okay, so wars take a long time to plan. 9/11, how soon after 9/11 was the illegal invasion of Afghanistan? very shortly afterwards. Next. Okay, General Martin Dempsey, Lindsey Graham, they make these admissions that, you know, Saudi Arabia is financing and so on. They try to distance themselves from it, but we know that's not the case. It outlines here, through Western sources, even the Vice President of the United States, he said U.S. allies, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, were so determined to take down Assad, they poured hundreds of millions and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad. Well, those are the U.S. allies. It's right there. These are admissions from Western sources. Next. This is a DEPCA file. NATO headquarters in Brussels and the Turkish High Command drew up plans for the military invasion of Syria, which is to arm the rebels with weapons for combating the tanks and helicopters spearheading the Assad regime's crackdown on dissent. Well, guess what? The Assad government's crackdown involved troops who weren't armed, but they were being fired at. Next. Oh, and I could say something about anti-tank weapons also. These high-tech weapons that the West is giving to the terrorists means that the Syrian Arab army soldiers suffer huge losses. For example, in these pictures, you're going to see a picture of Malula, which was is a historic site, a UNESCO site at Malula. They still speak, it's a Christian community for the most part. They speak the language that Christ spoke, Aramaic. And Al-Nusra Front occupied, they set up in a hotel, and they went into the Shrine of Taklia, and they burned all the crosses, and they burned everything. And in the chapel, they burned everything, and they stole religious icons because they don't believe in that. They would chop into heads, and you'll see pictures of this later. They just destroy all of the religious icons. And they were armed also with high-tech anti-aircraft weapons, so the Syrian army couldn't fly over. They have these TOW missiles. So the Syrian Arab army lost 200 soldiers just retaking that town. When they came in, the suicide bombers came into the gateway. They exploded themselves, or one of them did. There's even a tape on YouTube about that. And then they occupied the town. They killed some people. They kidnapped some people, and they fortified themselves in a hotel. And you'll see the burnt-out hotel. But it cost 200 Syrian soldier lives. Next. Okay, this is what Ken was talking about, proxy wars, 15 years of invasions. Next. That's the same thing, Wesley Clark, he admitted it. It was no secret. It was laid out well in advance. Next. Tim Anderson has done a great job documenting this. Highly recommend, as Ken would, that you look at his book. And basically the double game that we're talking about here is, I mean, the West says, well, we want to defeat terrorism, and we want to wipe out ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but actually the inversion is true. The Western governments, those calling the shots, want to expand the reach of terrorism because terrorists are the proxy soldiers. It's not about policing the world, it's about terrorizing the world. And you don't behead people moderately. And the FSA certainly did not kill these people moderately. So at some time you have to wonder too, how gullible is the public? This war has been going on for almost 6 years, and people still believe what the media is saying? Yeah. I don't know. These are intelligent people, but they still believe it. Okay, now here we have the human rights industrial complex. Vanessa Beeley has done an excellent job with this. This is part of the power of deception, of propaganda. These so-called human rights organizations, they call themselves non-governmental organizations, but they're all governmental organizations, and they're all sources for our media, and they're all embedded with the terrorists. Ken mentioned the white helmets. Those are Al-Qaeda folks. And there's videos also of them with guns, and they're also terrorists. And there's a video somewhere where there was an execution and the white helmets were there to clean up. Yeah. Okay, so they were in the running for a Nobel Peace Prize, Al-Qaeda helmets. And there's also Syrian Observatory for Human Rights as a source for many of our newspaper articles. That's one guy sitting in the UK. But the newspapers just write it all down. As soon as I see Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, I don't read that article. And of course, with USAID, which it isn't, USAID is a vector also for intelligence services and for funneling money, taxpayer money, into the hands of terrorists. And USAID and the intelligence services from imperial countries infiltrate other countries through these governmental sources. And these sources are very, very well paid. Okay, next. Look what we did in Libya. Isn't that too bad? Well, we made a mistake. No, these are never mistakes. The facts come out and people forget about it. No, I'm sorry, that's disgusting what you did to Libya. It's disgusting. You were bombing water infrastructure in a desert country. But it's glossed over. The facts come out. And guess what? That's a huge base for ISIS now. And now we have all sorts of refugees. And displaced people. Next. Double game, that's Tim Anderson again. Next. Libyan rat line, one of the reasons likely, and again, Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State at the time, one of the reasons that Libya was destroyed was to get at their weapons covertly. There is documented evidence. Weapons from the armories in Libya were transferred to Syria. We have that, Western open source documentation. That's where they got a lot of their weapons, at the beginning. Next. And those are big weapons too. Okay, so this one here, this is from Michel Chasudowski. This is a list of just one packing list of weapons that were delivered to moderate head choppers, who are conduits. They're just like quartermasters. They deliver the weapons to their buddies. And we're talking tons of weapons. AK-47s, we're talking anti-tank, we're talking RPG, rocket-propelled grenade. It's documented. It's there. It's proven. That's just one packing list for December 2015 shipment to the moderates, which aren't moderates. Next. Canada is selling military hardware to Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is the financier for ISIS. We're doing business with Wahhabi Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia grows terrorism. Those permits, the export permits, should have been canceled. Here. Absolutely. Here. Yeah. And we should have been making trains there, fast trains, not weapons for terrorists. And right now, Saudi Arabia is illegally bombing Yemen. Shame. Huge shame.
With American weapons.
With American weapons, and they're slaughtering people and infrastructure, and that's a poor country.
They're the biggest buyer of arms in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. And Canada's way up the list. Number 2, I think, for military hardware sales.
Okay.
These are the so-called Jeeps that Trudeau was talking about. Oh, they're just Jeeps. Okay, so if I'm driving down the highway and I see one of those Jeeps with the 1, 2, 3, with a gun, a cannon, and grenade launcher, I hope he doesn't have road rage. Those are the Jeeps that Trudeau was selling. we could be making fast trains. Instead, you know, our infrastructure is going downhill. Why in that London plant, why aren't we making trains? Why do we have to make weapons? I think if we gave the workers a choice, you can make grenades, you know, we can make these military hardware for our Saudi friends and our terrorist friends, or we can make fast trains. I think the workers would say, let's make fast trains. Next. Okay, so I think we're running out of time, correct? So I'm just going to show a few pictures, then I'll show you, so we're going to scroll quickly. And then I'll be over in about 5 minutes. So let's just go to the pictures. Whoa, okay, so that is at Malula. You notice the religious icons, they like to aim for the heads. And that's at the bottom of the steps leading up to the chapel and the shrine. Next. That's the real opposition there. They don't carry AK-47s. But they all support Assad. They're in the government, they support Assad, but they don't carry. That's the real opposition. So when the newspapers say opposition or militants, I'm sorry, that's the opposition. Next. That is the entranceway to Malula. Suicide bombers came in and exploded themselves, or one guy exploded himself, killed a bunch of soldiers, and then they moved in. Next. And, okay, that's yep, Shrine of Takia. Next. Okay, that's the inside of this Shrine of Takia. You know, you see the carbon marks? They burn the crosses. That's what they do. They destroyed this shrine. Everything, all the religious icons they destroyed. Next. The mayor's son, this is another common element. The mayor's son, or a high-level politician there, his son was murdered. The Grand Mufti's son was murdered. The Minister of Reconciliation's son was murdered. They say, okay, you take our money and you take our bribes, but don't deal with the government. And if these strong Syrians say no, I met 3 of them whose sons had been slaughtered. That was a hotel, and it became al-Nusra headquarters, and it was blasted as the Syrian Arab army defeated the terrorists. Next. This soldier over here, he was a veterinarian. A lot of Syrians are very well educated for the most part. This guy's a veterinarian, and then the war happened. He's been 5 years in the army. He speaks Arabic, French, English, highly intelligent people. He's a captain in the army now. He was thankful that he hasn't had to fight terrorists yet. But his life, of course, is totally disrupted. Next. That's the town down below, Malula. And over there is a statue of the Virgin Mary, which you can't see very well, but there's plenty of pictures there. Next. Walking through these gorges is like walking through biblical times. It's a spiritual experience. Next. We'll go to the next picture. Okay, that's the convent of Our Lady of Signia, and I know I'm not pronouncing that right. When we were up top there, American tourist actually is with our group. He mentioned something to an older gentleman about, he used the democracy word. And the older gentleman took great offense, and I know exactly why. The older gentleman has lost relatives to these terrorists, and the big lie that the West used is this democracy. Next. Another Christian church in the old part of Damascus where we were staying. And if Damascus is overrun, that'll be one of the first places destroyed. Next. That's the Grand Mufti. He stressed that, well, it's the Syrian state first, and then it's religion. And religion is not about chopping heads. It's moderation. And Islam is not about chopping heads and ruining icons. That's not what it's about. That's a deviant ideology. Next. Next. Okay, this is the Minister of Reconciliation. He was part of the legal opposition, and it was his idea to reconcile with terrorists. Lay down your guns if you're Syrian. We're going to take it back. Or you can join a brigade and fight terrorists. And with Russia in there as a mediator, it's been remarkably successful. The Syrians who have chosen to take the Gulf money and to bear arms against their fellow citizens, they are given a second chance. The out-of-towners, of which there are many, many, they leave. They have to leave, without their weapons. So that really was a brilliant idea, and it's working. But I mentioned this earlier. When the crisis started, he wanted to work with the government, and he got notice from Qatar. Look, we're going to offer you this. We're going to give you money and a place to stay, but you're not going to go work with your government. So they killed his son. Next. Famous souk. I don't know if there was McDonald's or Burger King there, but I didn't see any, and I was glad of that. Aren't there? There are not? That's excellent. I love that. It's totally unique, and I hope they always keep their unique identity. And if we have a unipolar world where national sovereignty and boundaries are violated and not seen as important, we're going to lose this. We'll lose this component of humanity. Next. And we met this person, artisan. Next. Okay, this is the bottom of the famous UNESCO site, the Crac des Chevaliers, Crusader Castle. And again, the same story. Now, the terrorists occupying that were from two foreign countries, Jordan, I think, and another country. Can't remember where. They were all foreigners. But they were equipped with high-tech American weaponry, and the castle to the top of the hill so that the Syrian Arab army couldn't bring their tanks up because they would get blown up if they did. So it meant huge losses to retake that castle. And then that's an example of some of the loss at the hill at the bottom of the castle. Next. This is inside the castle, and the stonework is unbelievable. Next, and then that's next. No straight lines as a protective device. So all the hallways, they have little curves to them, and there's a moat and steep walls. Next. That's what they call a round table. Next. There's the moat. That's a World UNESCO site as well. Next. And they are repairing there. Again, next. Okay, so here in this mosque, the great mosque of Damascus, do you know how to pronounce it correctly? Umayyad. Oh, okay, thank you. Inside is the shrine to St. John the Baptist, which to me that signifies, religious acceptance, religious tolerance, which is what Syria is, religious tolerance. Syria is not extremism. That's all imported. That's not what Syria is about. Next. So that's the shrine to St. John the Baptist. Next. And that's the courtyard. Again, next. Next. And that's what Syrians are fighting for. Their kids. And a secular future. And they're fighting for us, in my opinion. And that's about it.
Thank you very much, Mark. So we're going to have a question and answer, but before we do that, I'll just do a little bit. First of all, this is a free event, of course, as virtually all our Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War events. So, but we do take donations if you care to offer us any support. So, I think, Henry, are you going to take the... yeah, so Henry will be circulating with, if you have it, if you would care to make any sort of donation, but you don't have to, of course. And the other thing that it's an invitation. We're always looking for people to join us. If you're interested in our anti-war activities, we're very active. We have to be active in this environment. So if you would like to join us in our activities, you'd be most welcome. And you can speak to me or Ken or Brendan before you leave, and we'll get your coordinates, and we'd be happy to have you join us in our anti-war work. So we're going to have, I guess, almost half an hour of Q&A. So just basic principles. So we ask that if you have a question, please make it a question. So we can give everybody a chance. If you can try to keep it under 2 minutes, that would be appreciated. We, of course, will be very respectful. No disrespect to anyone, even if you strongly disagree with what their opinion might be. So that's fairly straightforward. And then what I'll do is if you just put up your hand, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions, and I'll just what I'll do is I'll try to keep gender parity as we go along to the best of my ability, and also I will always recognize first-time speakers or questioners over repeat questioners. So here we go, and okay, sir, would you?
Anyway, I thank both of the presenters for the information. Most of I'm concerned with Ken's talk. Just the very beginning, where you have a slide of the Taliban and Al Qaeda. Like, I don't equate the two organizations, one of which is sort of indigenous, part of a resistance movement in Afghanistan, and not really carrying out worldwide terrorism the way they were presented as the enemy in the beginning. Secondly, there are factors that caused unrest in Syria. Like, they had a severe drought in that area for a long time. So that's just an alertness that U.S. looks for opportunities where countries are going through crisis and strife. That's when they precipitate their attacks. But the one question is, and I think you missed it, you should, like I picketed Trudeau and he was in Port Colborne a few weeks ago, and I just carried a simple sign, on one side said, hands off Syria, and the other side said, get the terrorists out of Aleppo. And the reason I did that is because our Foreign Minister, Dion, was going to United Nations, where he's trying to get a broad organization of the General Assembly to carry out aggression against Syria, because they don't like the Chinese Russia vetoes. So I think you should do a little research on that, maybe include that in your presentation. Were you aware that that was going on with Dion?
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I was very aware of that. The Canadian government was trying to sidestep the United Nations Security Council by having a vote at the United Nations General Assembly to censure Russia and Syria. It didn't succeed, but I was well aware of that. I think what we have to remember is that the Canadian government, even now, with Harper gone, is still playing the same game. It's still supporting a foreign intervention in Syria and in Iraq. You may remember that when Harper put the motion on the floor to join the US-led coalition, all the opposition parties, the NDP, the Greens, and the Liberals all opposed joining the mission. And then when Harper decided that he was going, and at the beginning of the mission, the Canadian fighter bombers, the CF-18s, were not involved in bombing Syria, only in bombing Iraq. A few months later, Harper initiated the bombing of Syria as well, and both the Liberals and the NDP and the Greens all opposed that because it was a violation of international law. The US-led coalition has the permission to be in Iraq, but it doesn't have the permission to be of the government of Syria. So what they do in Iraq, whatever it is they're doing, good or bad, has the permission of the government, but they had no permission whatsoever to operate in Syria. During the election campaign, which saw the end of the Harper government, Trudeau said he was going to remove the CF-18 fighter bombers from Syria. And the day after the election, he phoned up Barack Obama and told him he was going to pull those planes out of the coalition. And it took him 6 months. They bombed, I don't know, they must have made 600 or 700 sorties over Syria before Trudeau finally pulled those planes out of the coalition. And Canadians thought, oh good, we're out of that. We're okay. You know, we have a different foreign policy. But that's not the case. If you read the fine print, what Trudeau actually did was he pulled the CF-18s out, but he left the reconnaissance planes, the refuelers, and the transport planes in the coalition. So, our planes are not bombing Syria.
Yay!
That is good.
That's a positive.
That is positive, but you have to remember, if you're involved in robbing a bank, and you are not the person who is holding the gun against the teller's head, but you're driving the getaway car, you are still an accomplice to a crime. And if your refuelers, your tankers, and your transport planes are still in the coalition that is bombing Syria, you are still an accomplice to a war crime. So that's one thing. We are still accomplices to a war crime. The second thing is, what Trudeau did was he removed those CF-18 planes, and then he tripled the number of Canadian trainers. These are special forces. These are the JTF-2, is it called? The Canadian Commandos. He tripled the number of them that are working with the Kurdish Peshmerga forces in northern Iraq. And I have one slide that'll take me a while to find it. It's on the it was a picture that CTV News took of the Canadian fighters who are training the Peshmerga fighters in the northern part of Iraq, and they're wearing the Kurdish flag on their sleeves. Now you have to remember that Canadian foreign policy is for the territorial integrity of Iraq and Syria. We believe that the countries should stay whole, at least on paper. But what's happened in northern Iraq is that since the first Gulf War, 1991, the Americans have been making creating a Kurdish separate state in the north of Iraq. That just happens to be where the oil is. And the Canadian trainers for this Peshmerga forces wearing the flag of that particular country, that separatist state on their sleeve, are doing is they are contributing to the breakup of Iraq. So it's another war crime. So people think that, well, God, we got rid of Harper. Great, everything's different. But unfortunately, it's not. It's Harper Light. It's Harper Light. And we have, what Dion did at the United Nations was Harper Light. It's still trying to bring down the Syrian government. We have to remember in the West that the only people that have the right to determine who rules Syria are the people of Syria. It's not Barack Obama, it's not Stephen Harper, it's not Stéphane Dion, it's not any of these other politicians in the West. It's only the Syrian people. If they don't like Bashar al-Assad, they don't have to vote for him. But they did, in huge numbers. And the polls had to stay open an extra day for that election. And thousands upon thousands, pictures of them filling the streets. Syrian refugees in Lebanon, they walked a whole day from Damascus to a suburb where the Syrian embassy is, and they lined up for an entire day. 140,000 of them lined up a whole day, 24 hours, to vote for Bashar al-Assad.
And I think some of them were shot and killed too.
I don't know that.
I heard they were.
And I was there our delegation went to observe the Syrian parliamentary elections early in this year, April 2016. And it was just, a handful of us. It wasn't like for the presidential election when they had an observer team from 30 countries. So we went into 5 polling stations, and I talked to people there personally. And this was not through a government interpreter. It's through people in our delegation who spoke Arabic. And I asked the people, why are you participating in this election? I'm participating in this election because this is my country. Well, what about, what the Americans say, that they said this election is not fair and that you're not supposed to have an election, there's supposed to be a peace process? And they would say, we don't care what they say in Geneva or what they say in Vienna. This is our country, and we are going to determine the future of our country. And so I think we have to understand in Canada that we should not be accomplices to the US and Britain and France and all these other NATO countries who believe that they have some God-given right to make the leaders of other countries live up to the standards or the rules that they want to. We have to say, we believe in national sovereignty, and the people of those countries have the right to self-determination. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking...
Over here.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what I need that, but I just, with all this going on, is Assad a military man?
Is he a military man?
Yes.
No.
Is it run militarily? That's what I understand. And that's what they were trying to get rid of him because of the militancy of the regime.
I think it isn't a regime. It's a government, and that's how the Syrians see it, as a government. But the West sees it as a regime, just like they see all target countries as regimes. Assad is not a bad guy. He's not the bad guy here.
Not the bad guy that we understood.
No. He's a medical
There's
doctor.
a lot of
Just
areas, a lot of areas that were against Assad in Syria.
Some of the
Rebels.
some of the terrorists are from the outlying areas, and a lot of money was offered to a lot of people, and mercenaries get paid maybe 4 times as much as the Syrian Arab army, and economic sanctions are killing that country. They're shipping equipment out so that jobs are disappearing. People can't afford to feed their families. They can't afford to take their kids to the hospitals. They can't afford cancer medication. People in desperate times do desperate things. But Ken can add to that.
I was looking at the maps, and that's where...
Well, if you notice where this first started was in a border town, which is not a typical, but it was a good transit point for foreign agents to infiltrate. The crisis didn't start in Damascus. It started in Dara. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's a sort of a common concern or question. I'm Brendan Stone. I'm a co-chair along with Doug here. And I just wanted to help out on that because you hear that a lot in discussion of